this Sunday in particular, a little bit of a different approach and different way of doing things today. This is the third week that we have that we're placing into our Renew series. And really, the main goal that we're trying to aspire to today is just sort of bring you up to date on where we as the elders, the staff, and leaders have determined this would be God's direction for us. And this is about the culmination so far of 7 months of work together to orient our focus in how specifically we as a church are going to move forward. So the Apostle Paul, when you look at his epistles and his letters, the first half is always doctrine. And then about exactly the midpoint, the second half is almost always going to be the application and how you do it. Well, for those of you that are coming for the first time, I got news for you. You're coming in about the midpoint of what it is that we're talking about here. It's as if you're in Romans and we're starting in chapter 12 where it says, therefore, and you go, okay, therefore, well, what preceded it all? Well, that was the last 2 weeks and the time that we invested and spent on looking in particular of the call that God has given us towards the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. Well, this morning, what I want to do is I want to take you a little bit on a journey with me. Why do we even need a revival, or renewal rather? Why do we need a renewal? Well, this goes back in many ways to COVID. And the Lord just working on my heart in particular, but working with the leadership that we have here as well. And it was about 5 months into it, it was becoming very clear this is going to be a whole new world when we come out of this. Things are going to operate differently. And I felt in many ways like Nehemiah must have felt when his friends came back for the first time from Jerusalem. He said, how is it, guys? And they said, it's rough. The walls are down, and Jerusalem is in disarray. Well, the world was in disarray, but the church was also struggling there too. And I knew something. If we don't purpose to be deliberate in figuring out how we're going to do ministry as we move ahead, we stand to miss some tremendous opportunities that always come when things are forced into a change. Now, I want you to hear me out. I want to make sure this is clear with everybody up front. I do not believe that the Bible tells us that the mission of the church is to change the culture. I do not hold to that. I know it says in the book of Acts that when the people went out, as a result, the church turned the world upside down. Folks, that was a consequence of the people doing their mission, but that was not the mission. The mission was to take sinners and turn them right side up, not necessarily take the culture and turn the world upside down. And during this time period, I kept asking God in my own prayers as we were looking ahead, God, what in the world are you doing? As time went on, I changed. I quit praying that prayer. I changed it to instead, God, what is it that you want us to do specifically? What would you have us to accomplish so that we can live out the Great Commandment and the Great Commission that you have given us in this time and in this place? And there was a verse of Scripture that I held on to a lot, and I prayed it frequently, and it comes from 2 Chronicles 16, verse 9. Here we go. For the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth, that he may strongly support those whose hearts are completely his. Now again, that verse doesn't say God's looking for the people. He knows who the people are. His eyes are moving to and fro to find the resources for his people so that they can conduct the mission and the purpose for which he has established them. And so we began this process, actually it was early last year, when we gathered together as staff and elders and leaders and just sort of rethinking and reviewing what it is that our values were all about and the guiding principles that we would have for our church as we purpose to move ahead and to go forward. But personally, I needed more. I needed help so that we could actually do something about this. And then the eyes of the Lord brought to me, in particular, a gentleman who had recently retired. And this gentleman said, I want to spend my retirement working for the Lord. I don't think it's to be out there, just merely having vacations. There's a place for that. But I want to spend it for the local church. Do you have any direction for me? And I said, you, my friend, are the answer to my prayer, because I can use your help. And together we began to pray and look and to ask it like Nehemiah of old, would you help us as we consider how do we rebuild the walls? How do we get things established and get them strong? And so it began with a survey, just like Nehemiah. He walked around the city and he looked at the walls to investigate what the issues were. But I said, help me as we seek to find out what that would be so that we can get very specific, deliberate, and very intentional about how this church will be used by God. And so you've got gifts I don't have. You've got some skills I don't have, and you've got some time that I don't have. Help me out. And so all the way back in about the April, May time frame, again, just like Nehemiah, we as church leaders began with fasting and prayer. We went before the Lord and said, we don't want to just come up with our ideas. Steer us, guide us, help us as we move forward. Give us direction, give us wisdom, give us clarity, and give us a focus. And so we had everything surveyed in a matter of a couple of months. And if you've got this little handout right here, you can just open it up, and there to the left, in the upper portion of the left, you can see some of the aspects of what it is that we surveyed, some of the things that we did, and what we found out. But we surveyed our attendance, we surveyed the giving data, the ministry trends, the demographics of the church. We looked at some of the issues that are within the community, and we began to look and compare that to how we as a church are wired. What has God gifted us with, and how can we take that to use it? We looked at our technology. We looked at every single thing that we have to say, God, this is the stewardship that you've entrusted us with. So with this, how can we best use it for your purposes? And we discovered something in this. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot. God has entrusted us with a tremendous amount. And God had been answering that prayer that I was praying from 2 Chronicles for about 2 years in advance. Because what we found out is, I felt in many ways kind of like what Solomon must have felt like when David came to him and said, here's the deal, Solomon, I don't get to build the temple. You're going to build it. But I'm giving you everything you need to do so. And when we completed this, I looked at everything that we had, me and the elders both, and we said, okay, God's given us a tremendous amount. And so the elders sought the help of a number of key ministry leaders and people that are helping us to oversee various ministries, and people that have very different gifts that were a real strength and an asset to us, and people who want to take those and they want to use them for the glory of God. So it was very exciting to begin this process. And we began to look and say, okay, God, what kind of a hand have you dealt us? Ladies and gentlemen, it was a straight flush. It was amazing. It was powerful. And now we said, if this is what you've dealt us, Lord, then we want to play it well. We want to be faithful with it. So today what I'm doing with you is I'm presenting to you the plan, the objectives that we're going after, and some of the specific goals. There's 5 different categories that we've got here. 3 of them are going to be missional and tactical. Jesus' specific instructions for us as a church that we have to have and hold on to. 2 of them are going to be structural and logistical. They're more the support structures that we would need to help us with the tactical. So when it came to the missional, we broke it down to 3 areas, and that's worship, outreach, and discipleship. Now, the basis for all of this, I've given you in the last 2 sermons. So if that's foreign to you, go back and listen to them online and get caught up with us. But there was also the structural components that we needed to look at, and that is our leadership and our technology and facilities. Now, again, 2 weeks ago, we looked at worship in depth, that it's meant to be a lifestyle, right? It isn't just singing merely. That's a part of it. But worship is the outflow of our response of love to God and everything that he's given us. And it's meant to affect every single thing we do for God and for his purposes. It's the motivator. It's the driver on why we do it. But corporate worship, like we just experienced here, that is also very important. In fact, I would say it's essential to part of your spiritual maturity. I mean, a powerful means of taking us and growing our hearts together in this time through singing, prayer, giving, the preaching of the word, communion, baptism. And we looked at our facility and we said, we want to optimize this facility to be able to accomplish that and to do it well. You know, when I was back in college, I started out in architecture, and I had to take an architectural history class, and it was fascinating. But part of the study was to look at the various cathedrals at the time. And it was amazing because here was this secular professor who made the point, when you look at these cathedrals, there's a theology in them. The reason they had these super high ceilings way back when is because you were meant to walk in and get a sense that God is big and I am small. They were meant to project the idea that when you saw the light coming through the stained glass, there was a sense of glory, and God is light, and feel his presence. Now, those things weren't actually accomplished. It was an aesthetic that was meant to help you in that and to facilitate it. Now, in modern times, a lot of times what people have done with churches is kind of go to the opposite end. So you might have a church that's built as a gymnasium or as a community center. And again, there's a theology to it. It's a theology that says we want this to be a place that people would come to. And neither one of those is right or wrong. It's just a different mentality an idea of what it is that you're trying to communicate of your theology. And so back when we were coming out of COVID, many of you know, we took our sanctuary, we turned it around. It was facing towards that wall, and now we've moved it in this direction. But we did that, one of the main reasons was because it was a much more efficient way of getting more people in here. Because coming out of COVID, it isn't that we're averse to ever being 2 services again, but we wanted to know who's here, who's a part of this body, and be united and be together. And we added almost 100 seats to the sanctuary by only turning it around and facilitating that. So it's been great. But there's another component to all this too, and that had to do with the added benefit that we had with acoustics. I learned in this process, you never project from the long side of a rectangle in a building, unless you have a way to bump it out. The acoustics are terrible, the seating is awful, and so by turning things around like this, we were able to get a much better acoustic and able to maximize our space a lot better because we wanted it to be better. Because when it comes to our worship with God, we want it to be excellent. And we want it to build each other up and strengthen our hearts. Psalm 33:3 says to sing to God a new song, and then the psalmist says this, play skillfully with a shout of joy. That idea about play skillfully, it's bring your best. You don't have to be perfect, but bring your best when you do so. And so we want to pursue that in our collective worship, in our setup, our technology, our symmetry, and the beauty that we can have in the aesthetics. And so our best means we want to get a stage that actually meets fire code too and comply with the civil authorities and do that which is right. But the mindset here, I mean, a big part of it, go back to the New Testament scriptures. You remember when Mary came and she took that vial of perfume and she broke it on Jesus' feet? And the others looking on said, what in the heck are you doing? We could take that. You know how far we could take that and how many other ways we could use that? And Jesus says, no, don't go that route. It isn't always about what's most efficient. This was an act of worship. And we want to do that with our facility and maximizing it and using it better. In my own home, there was several years back, Karen, we had this, our kitchen and dining room were separated by a wall. And Karen kept going, we need to knock that wall down and open this up. And I said, yeah, that sounds great, except for one problem. It costs money. I don't think I really want to spend money that way. And she said, we got to do it. And I said, why do we have to do it? And she said, because our structure needs to match our objectives. It needs to line up. And our objective is to be hospitable and to have folks in here. So I said, that's a pretty convincing argument. So we agreed to do it. I knocked the wall down. All was set right. And my goodness, the very first weekend that we could have our small group over, you know what I discovered? There were 5 people standing where the old wall used to be. And when I saw that, I thought Karen was right. She knew the structure has to line up with the objectives. And that's exactly what happened. That's what we want to do here. That the structure aligns with the objective of giving our best to God and giving that which is beautiful aesthetically. And so I personally would love to see this cleaned up to the point where people go, you know, I could go out there in the country to have a wedding, but I want to have it here because of the attitude of worship and beauty and just the invitation of God being in and being a part of this. That would be an awesome thing to see and to experience. And it would be free to those people that are part of this church and thus provide a means and a help to them as they celebrate a wedding together. Well, that's a big part of what we're looking at in terms of our worship together. I move now to our next category, and that's outreach. Now, first of all, let's highlight this. Outreach is every one of our responsibilities. We all have to step into this and to reach out. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the church also has the responsibility and the opportunity, too, to reach out to the community in love and to minister. And so, again, we begin to look at the resources that God has given us, that we've found. And we've got 2 teams that we've had already. That's our World Outreach team and our local outreach team. And each of them is trying to reach the gospel to different components, one beyond our borders and one certainly within our borders and within our areas. And as we looked at our local outreach in particular, we found that was a tremendous resource for us, but there's something we discovered in the process. And that is one of the great strengths that we have in this church is the strength of family and the significance of family. Not that family is the gospel, but it is a powerful tool that God will use to inculcate the gospel into people and into children in particular. And this is a day and age in which family has sort of risen to the surface within the community too, many of you know and are aware of. And so people need help and they need answers in this world in which morality is changing. And to be very candid, the world is going after children. It is. It's going after the children with their theology and with their teaching. And so what do we want to do? We want to go for the children, for Jesus. Not for our ends, but that they would know him. And so there's a lot of folks that don't really get a sense of their need for the gospel until they have children. The world sort of revolves around them and their life and what's going on. All of a sudden, this child enters into the picture, and they look at this and they go, oh my goodness, I'm responsible for this one. I'm impacting this one. How am I going to do this? And that's when they begin to ask questions. And we see this as a tremendous opportunity for us to say we have answers, and it's in accordance with the truth of what God teaches us in his word. And we can present the gospel, which not only brings them into faith, but it shows them how to walk in faith over time and to strengthen homes and to change lives. And so we want to do this. We want to do this like Peter says. He says, we're to be ready to give an answer, an account for the hope that is in you, but with gentleness and reverence. And so there's a lot of people that are ready to talk about the family out there, and they can be pretty caustic and pretty hard, right? We don't want to do that. We want to do this in a loving way. We want to do this in a way where we understand the challenges that people face, but we always want to bring truth, that is what they can hold on to, the word of God, which is what sustains us. And our local outreach team is committed to helping us as a church find new and creative ways in which we can do that and expand those opportunities. But the opportunities to reach out, it's not just for here. We want to go beyond our borders and continue to reach out into the world. And so we currently have had a fantastic team for our world outreach, a number of them having been former missionaries, but some of them, not so much that, but they bring in different skills and abilities. And it's been fantastic to see them and to partner with them or have them work through us to reach and to support missionaries all throughout the world. But during COVID, a lot of things changed. We lost several of our missionaries. Some of them passed away. Some of them stepped down in the ministry. Some of them changed. And so as a result, we saw, okay, there's sort of a reset that is getting ready to happen here. Now, what are we going to do? And how will we do so? And so in order to help our church to know and to support and to aid and to look and to find ways in which we can help other people across the world build up churches, communicate the gospel, and strengthen that first and foremost. And doesn't mean we can't do support projects to help along the way, but we want to be able to trace all of that we're doing back to, are we ultimately making disciples? And how can we trace our efforts to pointing us in that direction? So big kudos to our world outreach team, all the people that are a part of it right now, because they continue to work to strive to be core to our church strategy, to make disciples that are going to edify and evangelize and support those who do so. Now, we got a lot of tools that can help us in this, by the way. We've got some technology that we can really leverage. When I went to Ghana several years back, I was floored. Everybody over there has a cell phone. Doesn't matter how poor they are. Every single person has a cell phone. Technology is out there and is being used. So the question for us is, to what degree can we leverage it and use it throughout the world? And we can. Y'all might remember many months ago, we had Ambrose come and speak to us, but he spoke to us. He was actually across the seas in Pakistan. And yet we got to hear from him through a worship service. And then it wasn't about several months later, he just happened to be here. So he spoke to us from this pulpit. And I learned after the fact, all these people in Pakistan were hearing from him. It worked both ways. And so we see and we recognize that there's all kinds of ways that we can leverage technology to take our message and to export it, to get it out there. And to also get things out there into here so that we can be apprised and updated and know what it is that God is doing. And so we want to continue to build and invest in this. And I'll just give you a heads up on this when it comes to our world outreach. Back when Ukraine happened, that was sort of an interruption to an effort that we were looking at doing with Zambia. And we needed a lot of money for Zambia, but we had to put it on hold because Ukraine took precedence in that time. Well, we're ready to get things moving and going in that direction to bring some financial aid and support to help an effort in Zambia that you're going to hear more about in the coming months. But in the meantime, we have already released $50,000 to our World Outreach team to be able to say, now, how can we get it out there and how can we support this mission? So we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We want to make sure that the gospel gets out. So we've got worship, we've got outreach. But another one of the main piers that we're building on here is discipleship. And again, I spoke on it last week in depth, and many of you might remember I talked about 5 different considerations that we have to put into our thinking as we think about making disciples and how will we do it and get people onto this path. But isn't it amazing? I mean, the eyes of the Lord are working for all churches in the embarrassment of riches there are out there to get people discipled. Whether you want to talk about materials that are out there, podcasts, online classes, and then just the means by which an older man can take a younger man and talk to him in the commute to work and to leverage that. But a key piece of discipleship for us, ladies and gentlemen, let me just be very candid. It's you. It's you being ready to either be discipled or to help disciple somebody else. To be a person who says, I want to be a part of this and I want to build. We've got all kinds of children in this congregation. We want to continue to ally with parents and equip parents, but at the same time, pour into those kids. We need folks who are ready to teach and to pass on what they've learned to the children in particular through our Ridge classes, our Sunday morning Ridge classes, but Awana. And by the way, I'm looking at you singles and you grandparents in particular. You know, you spend a lot of time watching, I don't know, Fox News and looking at how bad things are for the next generation. It's time to get away from that and start saying, now what can I do for the next generation? How can God use me to invest and strengthen and build up these children that God has put in our path? And we want to help families in particular. Because if you want to help the next generation, you've got to begin in the home. When we did our survey, part of the statistics, we found 90% of people who come to Christ do so before age 18. That means they're getting it in the home. We had baptisms last week, 3 out of 5 under 18. It just solidifies what it is we already know. And it's important for us to invest and to pour into the families and into the homes. And if we're going to do this, we got to put some major horsepower behind it. We can't just wish it or try to come up with a checklist of things to do. So here's what we're going to do. In the next couple of years, our effort is to bring on another full-time staff member whose goal is going to be discipleship and family outreach. And it isn't that they're going to come in and do all the ministry. What they're going to do is they're going to come in and they're going to help equip us to be able to do that ministry and make an impact in and through our community as a result of it. So this brings me now to some of the support categories. What is it that has to be done to help facilitate what it is that I'm talking about? And the first category that I'm going to address here has to do with our leadership. Now, let me just be very straightforward with you. I feel like a lot of the reasons that have held our church back from a lot of the growth and opportunities that we've had in sort of these categories and areas, you can actually ultimately trace it to me and my limited abilities and my limited giftings. I have giftings in certain areas, but not in a lot of other areas. And so often in the past, this is the way things have happened. People come to me with an idea for ministry, or hey, can we try this? Or hey, can we do this? And I'm struggling with it because if I say, most of the time when I say yes, gosh, I have no idea. I have a lot of questions. How does this fit within the ministry that we have as a whole? What else has to be coordinated with it? What are the intended consequences? What are the unintended consequences that come with this? And I'm the one checkpoint that all this kind of filters through, and it slows and shuts everything down. And by the way, I got 91 plates spinning that are all unrelated to one another. And I'm sure most of you can understand and know that about yourselves too. But if I give just a quick answer and say, okay, yeah, let's just do that, more often than not, what I found, that generated bigger problems for us, as we had unintended consequences that came from those kinds of decisions, and they needed to be thought through, and they needed to be filtered through with other people and coordinated. And so the elders, this team that we came alongside, we all recognize, I got to have help. If we're going to do this, I got to have help, because I cannot effectively lead the church to be successful if I'm doing the counseling and I'm doing the leadership development and discipleship and the staff management, and if I'm planning the elder board meetings and I'm overseeing the adult ministries and education and I'm conducting the strategy and I'm overseeing the accountability and I'm trying to be visionary, all while preparing a sermon and a life room guide, which might alone take 25 hours out of the week right there. So it was clear. It's too thin. I'm too thin for this. We've got to have help. And so our plan is going to be to aid me in being able to occasionally step away from the pulpit. And the time that would be invested in those sermons can now be transferred into these other areas that are more important in the grand scheme, so that I can be focused more on a lot of the vision that we have and provide better oversight, so that I am not a reactionary manager anymore, but can be a proactive leader. And this plan is meant to cultivate and build new leaders. We've got help to do so. The eyes of the Lord have already found for us people who know how to consider and facilitate policies, because policies enable the delegation of duties. And now that gives people freedom, but with boundaries, that they know how to operate and how to move forward and move the ministry forward and not always have to just come to me and me be the choke point. And leadership as a whole within the church is going to be strengthened as a result of this, as we clarify the specific roles of the elders and the deacons and empower people to make decisions and provide accountability and lead ministries and understand how what they're doing fits within the whole. And we can do what Moses did in Exodus 18, as he said, I can't do it all. We're going to delegate to these who will oversee others, who will oversee others. And we'll have people that are helping us to facilitate and to build that. And finally, the final support structure. It has to do with the technology and the facilities that we have to accomplish our mission, because God's given us a building and people and resources, and God has given us money, finances as well. And so we want to use these tools for the glory of God. You know, it's an interesting little fact I learned in seminary, that the Apostle Paul, when he wrote the book of Romans, it is estimated when people look back and figure out the cost and the technology that he had to invest in, it probably cost him roughly $2,000, equivalent to today's money, to write the book of Romans and to be able to get it out and to hire the writer and to get the materials. And it's a big book, all the materials. Aren't you glad Paul invested in the technology of his day to get that message written and to be able to get it out? Or you can look at things like the roads that the Romans built. And those were the roads that Christians began to traffic on, to put their feet on, to go out and to take the gospel message that God had given them and to invest and to send it in other places. Well, folks, in many cases today, our roads are digital, and they go even further. They go throughout the entirety of the world, and we want to invest in that and utilize it to do the same. And so we want to take our technology, we want to use it in terms of aligning children's studies, aiding parents with something that they can take home to help facilitate devotions and teach and instruct their children. Or maybe just in coming in here, having easy access to things like notes for the sermons or the passages that we're looking at, and getting discipleship materials easily accessible for people so that they can then pass on what they know. And take our live stream and expand upon that and build upon it. But it is going to require us getting some help in the technological realm to be able to do this. And so we're looking at hiring some part-time workers, and we're going to look at some consultants that will help us take our technology and streamline it and make it better and make it more effective. And we're going to do it for the glory of God. That's the purpose and the drive behind it. I love what one of our elders said about a phrase with the government and technology. He says, often this is what I hear: we're using yesterday's technology to solve today's problems tomorrow. And while that's kind of funny and humorous when you think about the government, that's not what we want to do as a church. And so what do we want to do? We want to take his causes and apply these technologies and advance his purposes to the highest type of potential that he would provide for us. So we're going to build things. We're going to build our database as a means of helping us regarding our communications with one another, measuring what's going on, accountability and tracking. And some of you hear that and you go, uh-oh, am I hearing Big Brother? Quite the opposite. You know, you go back, it was Tony Kavicki, one of our helpers in this, he made the comment, and he says, you know, when you look at the parable of Jesus with the 100 sheep, how did he know one was missing? He was using his database of the day, if you will, in knowing what's going on and what is it that God is doing. And so what can we use one when they come? and we can help them. And the facilities God's given us, man, that's a powerful resource that God has already provided for us, and we know we can improve it. But here's another way we want to do it. If we're going to be reaching out and ministering to families, we want to build a playground out here that is substantial. We want it to be safe, but we want it to be best in class because that communicates a message. We care about the kids, and we care about your families. And let that be in some way sort of a beacon on the hill, if you will, that people know this church cares about families and the next generation. They're investing in them. Many of you, if you hang out more than 10 minutes after church and you walk out here, you'll see there's a ton of families that go out there to the playground that we have right now. I love it because it's these parents building fellowship. Their kids are building fellowship. I purpose to get out there. I'm the granddad phase, but I want to go out there and just hear and see what is going on with these people and these families and what's God doing. And I want to see that continue to grow, and you do too. But it's more than that. Because what a lot of you don't see is maybe on a Tuesday night, I can go out here and there'll be families in the neighborhood that come to the playground that we have right now. And they're out there playing on those grounds. And it's sort of this way of saying, you're welcome here. And we love having y'all here. So y'all come on. It comes back to your theology demonstrated by what you're providing in a building. We want to grant that and show that. Now, I've spoken a lot about the plans, what it is and some of the specifics of what we want to do. And you all are very well aware, Jack, I'm hearing things that are going to cost money. You are absolutely correct. And that money is not accounted for in our budget. These are going to be funds that come outside of our budget. The grand total we foresee is $630,000 over the next 2 years in addition to our budget because we can't stop funding our missionaries, our mortgage, the maintenance, and our missional commitments. And so as a team, these teams have gotten together. We've done the hard work and continue to do the hard work of determining what our costs would be to cover sanctuary renovations, a playground, a full-time pastor, part-time technological help, IT consulting, $100,000 towards world outreach, 50 of which we've already committed, and $30,000 towards our local outreach efforts. Now, before anybody here freaks out or faints, let me just say this. The eyes of the Lord have already found for us $380,000 of those dollars. That means all we lack is $250 to raise in the next 2 years, in addition to our budget. Now, some of you are still fainting and go, $250,000. I mean, in some ways, we got to put this in perspective. That's half the average mortgage in Loudoun County for one. And that's what we're talking about for 2 years. This is not insurmountable, people. And if you're still struggling with that, can I challenge you to consider 2 Chronicles 16:9 again? To watch and see what the Lord's eyes will provide as they go to and fro to find the resources for us to do our mission and accomplish our goals. And that's it. And now you see what I see. You're hearing what we've come up with. But I hope what you're picking out, this isn't just money going into some nebulous black hole. There are very specific goals. This isn't asking you to invest your time in these random things. There are very specific things that we're working towards, and it is aggressive, and it is very intentional. In fact, if you take your hand out here, you can kind of see there's a little space right here. We got these little charts in color. You can't read what's on there. But you can read them because they're in full size down by my office. And you want to see some of the tasks, the specific goals and tasks that we have, you can go down there and take a look at them yourself. I'll tell you right now, 439 specific tasks over the next 4 years. And the money that we're trying to raise is just going to front load funding towards that. Now the plan is flexible. We are ready to adjust as God directs otherwise. And if he opens new opportunities or he closes certain ones down, we're going to be sensitive to that. This coming April, in fact, it'll be the 1 year since we started this whole thing. We're going to do our annual review on this, and we're going to seek to adjust, and we want to clarify as needed. But let me tell you what we're not going to do. We are not going to sit still and wait for a plan and a funding to be at 100% before we go. We are going to be like Abraham. When God said, get up and go, And he went. He did not say, okay, but before I go, can you show me where the restrooms are and the restaurants? And let me get all that figured out. No, God said, go. I'll take care of you as you go. He's going to do that with us as well. And where he hasn't provided, then we'll stop until he does. And then we'll continue at that point. But we're going to move ahead. And I'll make you this promise. We are not doing this so that we can make a name for ourselves. Little Bible lesson, Genesis chapter 11, Tower of Babel. That's one of the main problems these people had. They said, we will make a name for ourselves. And God destroyed it. You go one chapter later into chapter 12, and God pulls Abraham aside, and he says, Abraham, I will make your name great. That's his responsibility. That's his job. God determines greatness. God determines fruit. We are called to be faithful with what God has given us. And this is a God who has covenanted with us. This is a God who's given us everything. So as an act of worship, this is what we want to do in response and in return. And some of my last words on this, let me just say this. It's not my words. It was actually a comment that was made when we were presenting this and finalizing this with a lot of the key leaders, staff, and elders. And one of our ministry leaders heard this plan, and he made this comment. He says, we need to remember that this is not about what this is going to give to us. We need to be thinking about the things that we're looking at right now. We're doing this for the people who aren't here today. They're across the street over here, and they're watching TV. They have no thought of God. They're the people over here whose marriages are crumbling, and they don't know what to do. They're the people out there who are uber successful, but they've got this vacuous hole inside of them right now, knowing, is this all there is? I've gotten the ring, and it's not filling me up. This plan is the objective and the goal, to go out and to find them and to love them and to minister to them. But I'm going to add to that. It's also to everybody who's about that tall and under. It's a plan that seeks to go after the next generation. And we want people to see and get the handoff of truth, to find a church that is on mission, to find families that are going to build disciples for Christ, and to find a people who will stand for Jesus no matter what the culture does out there. A people who are going to continue to take sinners and show them how to get right side up, and we'll leave it to God whether or not he'll turn the world upside down. That's his job. Oh. Are you with me? Let me ask Tom, worship team, would y'all come on up at this time, because they're going to close us. But as they're coming up, I want to ask you all to do something with me. I want you to ask, if you would, take out this handout that you've all received. And there's a question that's on the back, very simple. And it comes down to, what's going to be your role? And we're asking you to begin like we began, fasting, prayer. You go before the Lord and say, okay, Lord, how will I be used in this? What are my gifts? Line up with what God is doing here so that you can then take this and cause God's purposes to be met and to be accomplished. And so right down here on the bottom, we've got a couple of little notes here. I want to ask you, we won't call them sticky notes. We're going to call them prayer commitment cards. And on the end of the rows, we've got these Sharpies. I want to ask you to do something. If you're in this with us, and you're going to commit to praying with us, you take that Sharpie and you write your name on here. Each of you in your home, write your name on here. And when the service is over, I'm not going to dismiss you. I'm going to send you to the back over here, and we've got this big Renew banner. I'm going to ask you, put your signature on there. It's your John Hancock to say, I'm committed to filling in wherever it is God calls me and equips me to do this. And then I'm going to challenge you to do this, to believe. I'm challenging you to believe what God has been showing me for 2 years, that the eyes of the Lord are still searching to strongly support those whose hearts are completely his. Father in heaven, the mind of man, we plan our way, but it's you who directs our steps. We have prayed about this, and you've directed us, and we are ready to go. And we want all of this not to be our grand plans. We want it to be an act of worship in response to who you are. So begin with our hearts first, And then with our hearts united unto you, our plans second. And we're going to listen, Lord. We're going to adjust as you deem necessary. I remember just in your word you showed us when the Apostle Paul wanted to go to Macedonia, but you said no, not now. And he had to adjust. Well, we will too. But we will not delay, Lord, because we want to be faithful. And as we go forward in faith, remembering your words to us. Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Thank you. We are not alone. We are here, and you are here leading and guiding. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.